The silent arrival. The sun beat down on Dusty's back as he walked, the sparse shade offered by the occasional cottonwood tree doing little to alleviate the oppressive heat. Harmony Creek materialized slowly, shimmering in the distance like a heat-induced hallucination. As he drew closer, the illusion resolved into a collection of clapboard houses, a general store with a faded awning, and a church steeple piercing the azure sky. It looked peaceful. Too peaceful. He adjusted the worn leather strap of his pack, the weight of familiar comfort. His boots kicked up dust devils on the otherwise deserted road. The air hung thick and heavy, smelling of sun-baked earth and distant wildflowers. He noticed the silence first, a deep, pervasive quiet that felt almost unnatural after the constant wind of the plains. Then he noticed the stillness. Porch swings hung motionless. Dogs lay panting in patches of shade, too lethargic to bark. Even the leaves on the trees seemed to hold their breath. As he crossed the invisible boundary into Harmony Creek, a screen door slammed shut somewhere, the sound echoing with surprising force. A woman watering her petunias paused, her eyes widening slightly before she quickly averted her gaze. A boy on a bicycle wobbled to a stop, his mouth agape. The feeling of being watched prickled at the back of Dusty's neck. He continued his slow, deliberate pace, his eyes scanning the faces he passed. They were the faces of farmers, merchants, and housewives. Honest faces, mostly, but etched with a certain wariness. Whispers followed him like a shadow. Stranger. Didn't see him come in. Looks like trouble. He ignored them, focusing on putting one foot in front of the other. He'd grown accustomed to the suspicion, the distrust. It was a burden he carried with him, a constant reminder of a past he couldn't outrun. The general store, its paint peeling in the relentless sun, seemed to be the town's epicenter. A handful of men were gathered on the porch, whittling and spitting tobacco juice. As Dusty approached, the whittling stopped. The spitting ceased. All eyes were on him. He stepped onto the porch, the worn wood creaking beneath his boots. The air grew thick with unspoken questions. He nodded curtly, a silent acknowledgement of their scrutiny. "Mornin'," he said, his voice raspy from disuse. It felt foreign to speak. The men grunted in response, their expressions unreadable. A heavy-set man with a walrus mustache leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowed. "Help you with something?" "Just passing through," Dusty replied, his gaze steady. "Looking for supplies." The man scrutinized him for a long moment, his eyes lingering on Dusty's weathered face and the dust-caked clothes. Finally, he nodded towards the door. "Store's open." Dusty stepped inside, the sudden darkness a welcome relief. The store smelled of sawdust, coffee, and something faintly sweet, perhaps dried apples. An elderly woman with spectacles perched on her nose stood behind the counter, her fingers flying across the keys of an ancient cash register. She, too, watched him with undisguised curiosity. He gathered what he needed, a loaf of bread, some dried beans, a small piece of salt pork. He paid in silence, the woman's eyes never leaving his face. As he turned to leave, she spoke, her voice surprisingly sharp. "You new around here?" "Just passing through," he repeated, his tone neutral. "Heard that before," she said, her gaze unwavering. "People pass through Harmony Creek, but they don't usually stay long." He offered no response, simply nodded and walked out into the sunlight. The men on the porch were still watching him, their silence more oppressive than any words. He continued his trek through town, the whispers intensifying with each step. He could feel their judgment, their apprehension. He was an outsider, an unknown quantity in their carefully ordered world. Dusty quickened his pace, eager to leave the stifling atmosphere of Harmony Creek behind. He found a narrow path leading down to the river, a ribbon of silver winding through the green valley. He followed it, the sound of the rushing water a welcome distraction from the silent scrutiny of the town. He found a small clearing nestled among the trees, hidden from view. The riverbank was soft and mossy, the air cool and damp. It was as good a place as any to spend the night. He set about making camp, his movements efficient and practiced. He gathered firewood, built a small fire ring, and unrolled his bedroll. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The river reflected the colors, creating a shimmering spectacle of light and shadow. As darkness fell, he sat by the fire, the flames casting flickering shadows on his face. He ate his simple meal, his thoughts drifting back to the town he had just left. Harmony Creek, a place of quiet desperation and unspoken fears. He wondered what secrets it held, what darkness lurked beneath its veneer of tranquility. He knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that he wouldn't be passing through Harmony Creek as quickly as he'd hoped. Something was brewing there, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. And he had a feeling, a growing unease, that he was about to become entangled in it. He stared into the flames, his face etched with a weariness that went beyond mere physical exhaustion. He was tired of running, tired of hiding. But he knew better than anyone that some battles were unavoidable. And sometimes the only way to find peace was to stand and fight. Willow's world. The air surrounding Willow's cottage was thick with the perfume of lavender and the earthy tang of dew-kissed soil. Kneeling amongst her roses, she traced the velvety petals of a bloom, a thorn spite a mere whisper against her skin, easily dismissed. "Good morning, thorny one," she murmured, her fingers deftly removing a browning leaf. "Almost showtime, eh?" She moved with the practiced ease of someone intimately familiar with their surroundings, her hands serving as her eyes. She knew each plant by feel, the rasp of rosemary, the feathery lightness of dill, the smooth, burgeoning curves of the ripening tomatoes. The garden was her solace, a vibrant tapestry woven of scent and touch. A soft, wordless melody escaped her lips, a soothing hum that seemed to harmonize with the drowsy buzz of bees. A child's voice cut through the tranquility. "Widow Willow? I'm here. Lilybug. Well, aren't you a sight for, well, these ears?" A radiant smile lit up Willow's face, etching fine lines around her eyes. She extended a hand and Lily, a petite girl with sunbeam-colored braids, eagerly grasped it. "I brought the Princess and the Dragon book," she chirped, her voice brimming with excitement. "My very favorite." Willow chuckled, a warm sound. "Come, let's settle on the porch swing. The sun feels lovely there." Lily, a small but sure guide, led Willow to the porch. They eased onto the creaky swing, and Lily opened the dog-eared book. The aroma of aged paper and faded ink drifted upwards. "Chapter 5, Lily announced, her voice clear as a bell. Princess Aurelia, disguised as a wandering minstrel, approached the dragon's lair. Willow closed her eyes, allowing Lily's narration to paint vivid scenes in her mind. She pictured the brave princess, her lute slung across her back, and the dragon, its scales flashing like a hoard of emeralds, wisps of smoke curling from its nostrils. She'd always been captivated by stories, their ability to transport you to uncharted territories, to inhabit another's skin. As Lily continued, Willow's thoughts drifted back to the day the world had gone dark. A careening wagon, a frightened horse, the shriek of metal against stone. She recalled the searing agony, the all-consuming blackness, the crushing weight of despair. Before the accident, she had been a potter, her hands coaxing clay into elegant forms. She had feasted on a world of brilliant hues, the incandescent glory of sunsets, the verdant tapestry of the meadows. Now she perceived the world through the language of touch, the resonance of sound, and the steadfast compassion of people like Lily. The darkness had stolen her sight, but not her spirit. She had learned to navigate a new reality, finding joy in the subtle details, cherishing the beauty that persisted. Though shadows clouded her vision, her heart remained open, her mind keen. Lily broke off reading. "Widow Willow, are you all right?" Willow gave Lily's hand a gentle squeeze. "Just reminiscing, dear, about how fortunate I am to have such a dear friend." Lily grinned. "I love reading to you. You always make the best dragon noises." Willow chuckled, a throaty rumble. "Well, a captivating tale deserves a proper dragon roar, don't you think?" She cleared her throat and unleashed a deep, resonant growl that sent Lily into a fit of giggles. The peaceful scene was fractured by the sound of an approaching vehicle, an unusual occurrence so early in the day. A deeper rumble than the familiar clatter of Jedediah's truck or the purr of Martha's sedan. A furrow creased Willow's brow, a sliver of apprehension prickling her skin. She strained her ears, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. "Someone's coming," she murmured, her voice hushed. "A stranger, I believe." Lily, ever observant, peered around the edge of the porch. "It's a man, Widow Willow. He looks coated in dust, and he has a peculiar expression." Dusty. The word resonated within her, a distant chime in the silent chambers of her mind. She couldn't articulate why, but a peculiar sense of anticipation stirred within her. A feeling that this dust-covered stranger held a key, not simply to the unfolding future, but perhaps even to unlocking long-buried secrets of the past. Odd jobs and quiet hands. Dawn broke on Willow's empty property, the stranger vanished like morning mist. Yet his presence lingered in Havenwood. Mrs. Gable, plagued for weeks by stray cattle decimating her prized petunias, discovered her fence resurrected. Stout posts, deeply planted, held wire-strung drum-tight. No note accompanied the handiwork, just solid construction. She recalled him passing her place yesterday, a silent silhouette against the late afternoon sun. She knew. Across the street, Sheriff Brody, more inclined to goodwill than rapid decisions, observed Dusty Rivers secure the final staple on Mrs. Gable's fence. Sunlight blazed off Brody's badge as he leaned against his cruiser. Drifters were common enough, seeking handouts, moving on. This one felt different. An undercurrent of purpose shaped his movements, a quiet skill hinting at experiences beyond Havenwood's tranquil borders. Brody pushed off the car, clearing his throat. "Morning," he called, approaching. Dusty paused, hammer poised. His gaze, the color of storm clouds before rain, met Brody's. A curt nod was his only reply. "Name's Brody," the sheriff offered, extending a hand. "Sheriff Brody." Dusty wiped his palm on his worn denims before accepting the handshake, his grip surprisingly strong. "Rivers," he rumbled, his voice a deep baritone like shale sliding on a mountainside. "Dusty Rivers." "Heard you were looking for work," Brody ventured, aiming for nonchalance. "Anything I can do to help?" Dusty resumed his hammering, each blow precise and resonant. "Got it covered," he answered, eyes fixed on his task. Brody lingered, an unspoken question hovering on his tongue. Where did Rivers come from? What brought him to Havenwood? Something in the man's quiet intensity held Brody's curiosity captive. By midday, whispers rippled through town. Rivers was re-roofing old Mr. Henderson's barn, shingles dancing into place under his expert touch. Then he appeared at the general store, assisting Martha Sue with unloading feed sacks, shouldering two at a time as if they were pillows. He labored with tireless efficiency, his brow creased in perpetual focus. When Mr. Henderson offered payment, Dusty refused outright. "Needs doing," he stated simply. "That's payment enough." Mr. Henderson sputtered, dignity affronted. He wasn't one to accept charity. But Dusty remained resolute, his gaze unflinching. Finally, Henderson conceded, grumbling about stubbornness and the loss of good sense. The puzzle deepened. Not money, not companionship, just work. As twilight painted the sky in fiery hues, Dusty sat on the porch of the rundown cabin he'd leased on the edge of town. He watched fireflies ignite the dusk, pinpricks of light mimicking distant constellations. He'd uttered barely a dozen words all day. Willow came to mind, her gentle touch, the faint perfume of roses that clung to her. Her blindness, a darkness he understood in ways these townsfolk couldn't. He knew the sting of judgment, of being observed but never truly seen. He closed his eyes, haunted by the phantom of a burning house behind his lids. The screams, the choking smoke, the pointed fingers. He banished the visions, clinging to the present. He was here to assist, to contribute in any way he could, quietly, without attracting attention. To find redemption. Sheriff Brody cruised past the cabin, decelerating as he neared. He spotted Dusty on the porch, a solitary form etched against the fading light. He debated stopping, offering coffee, attempting to breach the man's stoic exterior. Yet something restrained him. An intuition, perhaps, whispering that some scars are best left to heal in the quiet solitude they demand. He continued on, the sinking sun stretching long shadows behind him, leaving Dusty Rivers alone in the encroaching night. An unspoken agreement. The rhythmic thud of the axe echoed through Willow's small yard, each strike a clean, sharp note against the backdrop of rustling leaves. She sat on her porch swing, the worn wood creaking softly under her weight, and listened. Not just to the sound, but to the man making it. Dusty Rivers. She'd heard the stories whispered in town, the quiet stranger, the tireless worker, the man who refused payment. Most saw a mystery, a question mark etched on his weathered face. Willow, however, heard something different. A deep, resonant sadness, yes, but also a profound gentleness. It had taken her days to work up the nerve, but this morning she'd stood at her gate as he passed, her hand outstretched. "Mr. Rivers," she'd asked, her voice a little shaky. "Would you be willing to chop some wood for me? Winter's coming." He hadn't spoken, only nodded, his eyes, the color of a stormy sky, meeting hers for a brief, intense moment before he'd turned and headed towards her woodpile. Now, the scent of freshly split oak filled the air, mingling with the earthy aroma of her herb garden. She could almost feel the sun glinting off the newly exposed wood, its grain a map of years and seasons. Later, when the stack had grown considerably, he approached her porch. He didn't ask for direction, simply waited. "The herbs," Willow said, gesturing vaguely towards the garden with her hand. "I need to gather some before the first frost. Sage, mostly, and a little thyme." Dusty moved with a surprising grace, his large hands surprisingly delicate as he knelt beside her. He let her hand rest on his, guiding it to the velvety leaves of the sage plant. "Here," he murmured, his voice a low rumble, almost a whisper. "Feel the texture. The stems are tougher." Willow closed her eyes, inhaling the pungent fragrance. The warmth of his hand, the rough calluses against her skin, created a curious intimacy. She snipped the sage with her small shears, placing it carefully in her basket. Dusty continued to guide her, pointing out the thyme with its tiny, needle-like leaves. He didn't rush her, didn't offer empty platitudes or unnecessary assistance. He simply was there, a quiet presence, a steady hand. It was a form of communication she understood, a language spoken without words. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Willow straightened, her back aching slightly. "That's enough for today, I think." Dusty nodded, gathering the basket and shears. He followed her into the small cottage, placing the basket on the kitchen table. The room was filled with the comforting smells of lavender and beeswax. Willow moved to the stove, her hands familiar with every pot and pan. "I'm making stew," she said. "There's plenty. Would you like to stay for supper, Mr. Rivers?" He hesitated for a moment, his gaze fixed on the worn wooden floor. Then he lifted his head, his eyes meeting hers again. A faint, almost imperceptible nod. Willow's heart fluttered. It wasn't just gratitude she felt, but something deeper, a sense of connection, of understanding. She ladled the stew into 2 bowls, the savory aroma filling the small kitchen. She placed one in front of Dusty at the small, round table. He sat stiffly, his large frame seeming too big for the chair. He took a tentative spoonful, his eyes closing briefly. When he opened them, there was a flicker of something in their depths, gratitude, perhaps, or something more profound. They ate in silence, the only sounds the clinking of spoons against bowls and the crackling of the fire in the hearth. It wasn't an awkward silence, but a comfortable one filled with unspoken understanding. An unspoken agreement. After he finished, Dusty stood, taking his bowl to the sink. He rinsed it carefully, placing it on the drying rack. He turned to Willow, a question in his eyes. She knew what he was asking. Was he dismissed? She shook her head slightly. "There's apple pie," she said softly. "If you'd like some." He sat back down, his shoulders relaxing slightly. Willow cut 2 slices of pie, the sweet scent of cinnamon and apples filling the air. As they ate, Willow felt a sense of peace settle over her, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. She didn't know what Dusty Rivers' story was, what demons haunted him, but she knew, instinctively, that he was a good man, a man in need of redemption, and perhaps she thought she could help him find it, or perhaps he could help her. Flames in the night. The fridge's quiet thrum, a familiar lullaby, was the last sound Willow registered before sleep descended. Outside, the wind had gathered strength, assaulting the aged windows. Meanwhile, behind the appliance, near the archaic fuse box, a different kind of menace was brewing. A wire, frayed from years of service, sparked sporadically. Each tiny flare seemed inconsequential, practically invisible in the filtered dimness. Yet, with every flicker, dust bunnies and spider webs in its vicinity grew warmer, drier. Then a spark lingered. It seized a persistent thread of webbing, igniting it with a whisper-quiet poof. The nascent flame, a mere spark of light, flickered erratically, feasting on the parched detritus surrounding it. It tentatively kissed the wall, finding the antiquated wood surprisingly combustible. The blaze crept stealthily, at first unseen, within the wall cavity. A fiery finger reached greedily upwards, probing for the tinderbox attic. Another wormed along the baseboard, drawn to the subtle aroma of linseed oil from the seasoned floorboards. Oblivious, the refrigerator continued its mechanical song. A wisp of smoke, thin and bitter, began to infiltrate the kitchen. It snaked along the doorframe edges, an ethereal trespasser. Willow shifted in her slumber, a dry, hacking cough escaping her lips. She dreamt of her childhood home, reduced to ashes long ago. The smoke scent was identical, acrid and suffocating. She thrashed, desperate to escape the nightmare, but it clung like a death shroud. The smoke intensified, now a tangible presence within the cramped dwelling. Emboldened, the fire punched through the kitchen wall, a ravenous orange tongue licking into the room. It sampled a wooden chair, then a tablecloth, consuming them with ravenous fervor. Heat swelled, radiating outward in undulating waves. Willow bolted awake, heart hammering against her ribs. The odor was unmistakable, sharp and bitter, assaulting her senses. Smoke. Not just a phantom of the night. Real. Fire, she croaked, her voice raw with sleep and panic. She sat upright, disoriented, unseeing eyes wide with terror. The cottage's floor plan was ingrained in her memory, yet the swirling haze and encroaching heat made her feel adrift and vulnerable. She groped for her cane, fingers flailing in the gloom. Where was it? Beside the bed? By the doorway? Every heartbeat mattered. The fire roared and crackled, a predatory beast devouring her sanctuary. The heat seared her face. She could feel the flames testing the air, drawing nearer. "Help me," she cried again, her voice a threat of desperation. She scrambled from the bed, hands outstretched, seeking the room's familiar features. The floor scalded her palms, burning through her flimsy nightgown. She knew she had to escape, but which direction? The door was to the left, she thought, but the heat felt more intense that way. Was her escape route blockaded? She moved haltingly, cautiously, tracing the wall. The smoke was dense and choking, stealing her breath. Coughs racked her body, lungs aflame. Panic threatened to drown her. She forced herself to remain calm. She had to visualize the cottage. She had to find the exit. Abruptly, her foot struck something. Her cane. Relief surged as she clutched it, using it to test the space before her. The heat was agonizing, almost unbearable. The inferno's roar filled her ears, the symphony of destruction echoing around her. She edged forward, painstakingly, her cane tapping against the floorboards. A wave of scorching air washed over her, a jolt of excruciating pain across her skin. The flames were close. Too close. A soundless scream tore from her throat, born of pure dread. She was cornered. Into the inferno. The comforting aroma of wood smoke from Dusty's small fire, a pleasure just hours prior, had morphed into a caustic stench, assailing his senses with a sickly sweetness. He tilted his head, inhaling deeply. Not plastic. Worse. Burning cloth. Then he saw it, an erratic orange luminescence staining the trees beyond his humble camp. Willow's cottage. His lungs seized. He was moving before conscious thought took hold, boots thudding against the yielding earth as he raced through the woods, the memory of Willow's kind smile emblazoned in his mind. He hadn't run like this in ages, a time best left buried. As he neared the structure, intense heat pulsed outward, a palpable malignancy. Ravenous tendrils of flame clawed at the windows, consuming the aged timbers. Smoke poured from the eaves, suffocating the air. Without pause or deliberation, he acted. The front door, already compromised by decay, shattered inward from a single, forceful kick. He lunged into the blaze, the heat slamming into him, instigating a harsh cough. The air, thick with particulate, limited visibility to mere inches. "Willow," he bellowed, his voice raspy, nearly swallowed by the fire's savage roar. "Willow, can you hear me?" A wave of panic threatened to overwhelm him. He dropped to his hands and knees, the air marginally cleaner near the floor. Scrabbling forward, he used his hands as guides, encountering familiar objects, a small table, a rug, now reduced to embers. "Willow!" he cried again, his voice cracking. A faint, distant whimper reached his ears. Zeroing in on the sound, he crawled deeper into the smoke-choked interior, his eyes stinging, his lungs protesting with each ragged breath. He collided with something yielding, an overturned chair. Dusty, her voice, a fragile thread, was barely discernible. Relief surged through him, almost buckling his knees. "Willow, where are you?" "Here, by the hearth." Guided by her shallow breathing, he inched forward. He found her huddled on the floor, soot blackening her face, her eyes wide with blind terror. I can't find the door," she whispered, clutching his arm. "It's all right, Willow. I've got you." Kneeling, he scooped her into his arms. She was feather-light, fragile. The heat was now unbearable, the flames a frenzied beast tearing through the room. He felt his skin prickle, the scent of singed hair filling his nostrils. Escape was paramount. Immediately. He rose, flinching at the tormenting heat, and pivoted toward the entrance, shielding Willow's face with his arm. The smoke now formed a dense vortex around them. He stumbled blindly ahead, relying solely on muscle memory. The cottage emitted a low, ominous groan. He chanced a quick glance upward. The roof sagged, glowing an angry red. Imminent collapse. He pressed onward, his muscles burning, his lungs screaming. The faint silhouette of the doorway beckoned, a distant promise in the smoky abyss. As he neared it, a flaming beam plunged from the inferno above, missing them by mere inches, unleashing a cascade of sparks and embers. Willow cried out, burying her face against his chest. He didn't falter. He couldn't. He burst through the portal, staggering into the cool night, collapsing onto the grass just beyond the threshold. He lay there, gasping, his chest convulsing, the image of the impending destruction seared into his memory. Willow lay pliant in his arms, coughing weakly. He rolled onto his side, drawing her closer, sheltering her from the lingering smoke. He felt her trembling, her slender frame racked with tremors. He gazed back at the structure. Flames erupted from every opening, turning the night into a canvas of destruction. Irretrievable. He tightened his embrace, a fierce wave of protectiveness washing over him. He had saved her. He had actually rescued someone. The realization struck him with the force of a physical blow, igniting a dormant ember within him. He coughed, the bitter taste of smoke clinging to his tongue. Shelter, away from the heat and choking fumes, was his priority. He rose, cradling her, and carried her towards his campsite, distancing himself from the conflagration that had consumed her home. Behind him, the fire raged, a ravenous entity devouring all in its path. He refused to look back. A touch of metal. Willow choked, a ragged expulsion that shattered the stillness. Beside her, kneeling on the dewy ground, Dusty fought to draw breath, the air thick with the pungent scent of burning wood. He eased her against the gnarled trunk of an oak, its leaves whispering secrets to the uncaring night, a world apart from the ravenous blaze devouring her life. Easy, he croaked, his throat a desert. Just breathe. He fumbled with the neck of her nightdress, the flimsy cotton a poor shield against the night's bite. Her inhalation stuttered, shallow and erratic. Dusty, you came back. He averted his eyes, watching the firelight bloom in the pools gathering in her lower lids. Couldn't leave you. The conflagration roared, erasing every trace of Willow's past, every comfort. Soot-motes ascended like scattered prayers, briefly illuminating the inky canvas above. The heat pulsed, a stark reminder of their near demise. Gradually, Willow's spasms lessened, resolving into ragged, desperate gulps. A trembling hand reached out, blindly seeking purchase. Dusty hesitated, then enfolded her hand in his. Her grip surprised him with its strength, her skin delicate paper against the rasp of his palm. Thank you, she breathed, the word a raw whisper brimming with heartfelt gratitude. You risked everything. He offered no reply. Everything had become a currency he no longer traded in. He was a shadow wandering the earth, burdened by memories he couldn't shed. Saving Willow, it was pure reflex, a dormant ember reigniting within him. Her fingers tightened, then began a slow, tentative exploration. She traced the lines of his palm, the rough topography of his knuckles, the calluses earned from relentless labor. It was an unspoken dialogue, an intimacy that transcended the spoken word. He remained motionless, a statue under her gentle scrutiny. He hadn't known such tenderness in an age. Then her fingers ascended, brushing against the coarse weave of his shirt, pausing before continuing their climb. He felt a clench in his gut. Her hand stilled. A subtle crease appeared between her brows as if grappling with an invisible riddle. The exploratory touch now adopted a subtle insistence, a gentle probing. What's this? She murmured, the question almost swallowed by the fire's hungry crackle. Dusty's pulse hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He knew precisely what she felt. It had been years since he'd acknowledged it, since he had considered removing it. It was an intrinsic part of him, branded onto his soul, a constant reminder of a history he had desperately tried to outrun. He swallowed hard, the action painful. Nothing, he mumbled, the response barely audible. But Willow didn't relent. Her fingers pressed harder, delineating the form beneath the fabric. Small, round, and chilled. The telltale feel of metal. It feels like a badge, she ventured, curiosity coloring her tone. Is it metal? Silence. His jaw tightened, a rigid line. The fire spat and roared, sending a shower of sparks skyward. The reek of smoke clawed at his throat. He felt the weight of Willow's unseen gaze boring into him, demanding truth. Dusty, she prompted softly, her fingers unwavering. What kind of badge is it? The burden of his past descended, a suffocating weight. He had tried to bury it, to flee from it, to reinvent himself. But some things, like ash clinging to cloth, proved impossible to erase. He glanced away, towards the inferno-consuming Willow's world. The flames writhed and danced, mirroring the chaos within him. He knew he could no longer conceal the truth, not after pulling her from the blaze. Not after her trusting touch. He inhaled deeply, the acrid air searing his lungs. It's from a life I used to live, he finally confessed, his voice a fragile thread. A life I left behind. Whispers and suspicions. The acrid smell of smoke hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the sweet scent of honeysuckle that usually perfumed Harmony Creek. Neighbors coughed, faces smudged with soot, as they doused the last embers of Willow's cottage with buckets of water hauled from the creek. The fire, thankfully, had been contained before it could spread to the neighboring homes. Mabel Higgins, her ample bosom heaving, clucked like a mother hen. Poor Willow, poor dear. Everything she owned. Others murmured in agreement, their voices hushed with concern and a newfound, unspoken curiosity directed towards the tall, silent figure standing a little apart from the crowd. Dusty Rivers. He hadn't said a word since pulling Willow from the flames, his face a mask of grim detachment. He simply stood there, watching the aftermath, his knuckles white as he clenched his hands into fists. Willow, wrapped in a borrowed quilt from Mrs. Peterson, sat on a makeshift bench cobbled together from a wagon seat and a couple of overturned crates. Her face was pale, but her voice was steady as she thanked each person who offered help or condolences. She squeezed Dusty's arm as he passed by, a silent gesture of gratitude that spoke volumes. Sheriff Brody, a man built like an oak tree, surveyed the scene with a practiced eye. He'd seen fires before, some accidental, some not. He knelt beside Willow, his gaze softening. "You all right, Willow? Anything I can do?" Willow reached out and gently touched the sheriff's weathered hand, her touch light as a feather. "I'm shaken, Brody, but I'm all right. Dusty saved me." Brody nodded, his gaze drifting towards Dusty, who was now helping old Mr. Abernathy salvage a few singed books from the wreckage. "He did. Brave thing he did." He paused, then lowered his voice. "Willow, is there anything you remember about the fire itself? Anything out of the ordinary?" Willow hesitated, her brow furrowed. The smell of smoke still clung to her senses, blurring the edges of her memory. Then she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, "When Dusty pulled me out, I felt something under his shirt. Metal. A badge, I think. Round. With raised lettering." Brody's eyes narrowed, his gaze sharpening. He knew Dusty Rivers was an enigma. He drifted into town months ago, a quiet, self-sufficient man who kept to himself. He worked odd jobs, always willing to lend a hand, but never offering any information about his past. A badge that changed things. He stood up, his boots crunching on the charred ground. "Thank you, Willow. You rest now." He walked towards Dusty, his movements deliberate, each step measured. The crowd parted slightly as he approached, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "Dusty," Brody said, his voice neutral but firm. "Can I have a word?" Dusty stopped sorting through the books, his gaze meeting Brody's. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, a brief flash of fear? Regret? It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by his usual guarded expression. "Sheriff," Dusty acknowledged, his voice low and gravelly. Brody gestured towards the edge of the property, away from the prying eyes and ears of the townsfolk. "Let's talk over there." They walked in silence to a spot near the creek bank, the water gurgling softly over the stones. Brody leaned against a gnarled oak tree, his arms crossed. "The fire, it was a close call," Brody began, his tone conversational. "We're lucky you were there, Dusty." Dusty simply nodded, his gaze fixed on the water. "Willow tells me you pulled her out." Quick thinking. Brody paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "She also mentioned something about a badge." Dusty's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. "A metal badge under your shirt. Round, with lettering." Brody's voice was unwavering, his eyes boring into Dusty's. "Care to tell me about it, Dusty?" Dusty finally looked up, his gaze meeting Brody's head-on. His eyes were like chips of flint, hard and unyielding. "I don't know what you're talking about, Sheriff." Brody didn't flinch. He'd seen that look before, the practiced denial of a man who was used to hiding things. "Don't play coy with me, Dusty. Willow's a good woman, and she doesn't lie. A badge, it suggests a certain history, a certain profession." Dusty turned away, his back to Brody. He took a deep breath, the smoke-tinged air filling his lungs. The years he'd spent running, the careful construction of a new life, threatened to crumble around him like the charred remains of Willow's cottage. "It's nothing," Dusty said, his voice barely audible. "Just something I used to have." "Used to have," Brody repeated, his voice laced with skepticism. "Used to have what, Dusty? A lawman's badge? A military medal? What kind of life did you leave behind that you're so eager to forget?" Dusty didn't answer. He remained silent, his body rigid, his secrets locked tight within him. The creek babbled on, oblivious to the storm brewing within the man standing on its bank. The whispers had begun, the suspicions ignited. Harmony Creek, once a haven, was now a place of scrutiny, and Dusty Rivers, the silent drifter, was firmly in the crosshairs. The fugitive marshal. Static crackled through Sheriff Brody's cruiser, slicing through the tranquil morning. He'd been sipping tepid coffee, watching the eastern sky bleed into existence with strokes of rose and lilac, when the dispatcher's voice shattered the calm. "Repeat, sought for questioning regarding federal fund misappropriation and hindering an investigation. One Dustin R. Rivers. Subject is presumed armed and volatile. Last spotted operating in the Intermountain West. Description: 6'2", grizzled brown hair, noticeable cicatrix above the left brow. Brody's grip clenched the steering wheel, plastic biting into his skin. He gazed at Harmony Creek's slumbering main street, the bulletin reverberating in his mind. The description matched a certain newcomer a little too closely for comfort. He nudged the volume higher. Rivers previously held the rank of U.S. Marshal. He vanished 3 years prior following allegations of evidence tampering and a significant sum of missing money from a drug bust. Anyone with knowledge is urged to contact. The drone of the announcer faded as Brody's mind spun. Dusty Rivers, the reticent stranger who drifted into town months ago, generally keeping to himself, always offering assistance. The man who'd rescued Willow from her inferno of a cottage. The man Willow insisted carried himself like a marshal. He killed the radio, the ensuing hush amplifying the thrum in his temples. Could it actually be? Could the self-effacing handyman be a wanted ex-lawman? The notion felt preposterous, yet the persistent unease, bolstered by Willow's intuition and this very broadcast, lingered stubbornly. He knew his next steps. Later, Brody discovered Willow perched on a rough-hewn seat opposite the smoldering wreckage of her home. A volunteer team meticulously picked through the remains, seeking any remnant worth saving. Swathed in a thick blanket, she appeared pale but collected. "Morning, Willow," Brody murmured, kneeling beside her. "Sheriff," she replied, her voice slightly hoarse. "Anything found?" Brody hesitated. I caught something on the radio earlier. A news item." He paused, carefully selecting his words. "About a man named Dustin Rivers." Willow's head cocked as if straining to hear a frequency beyond the audible. "Dusty," she amended quietly. "What did they say?" Brody inhaled deeply. He's wanted for questioning. Apparently, he's a former U.S. Marshal." Willow remained mute for a protracted moment. Brody could practically sense the cogs turning within her. Finally, she spoke, her tone unwavering. "That doesn't shock me." Brody frowned. "It doesn't? You hardly know the man." "I know his essence," she countered, her sightless eyes seeming to pierce him. "I felt it when he bore me from the flames." Without pause, without hesitation. He considered no self-preservation. "Bravery incarnate, Sheriff. Not the act of a felon. The report alleges embezzlement and hindering justice, Willow. Severe accusations." "Allegations are merely that, Sheriff." "Allegations? I know Dusty's heart. He's a righteous man. He's offered only kindness and aid since arriving in Harmony Creek. He merits the benefit of credence." Brody sighed, raking a hand through his thinning hair. "I have a duty, Willow. I must investigate." "Naturally," she conceded, her tone softening. "But don't permit the airways to muddy your perception. Observe the human being, Sheriff. Gaze into his soul. The truth resides there." Brody rose, his joints protesting the chill. He surveyed the skeletal frame of Willow's dwelling, then regarded her, her face stamped with resolute calm. He knew she wouldn't yield her position. He also knew he couldn't dismiss the bulletin, regardless of his inclination. "Thank you, Willow," he said at last. "I value your perspective." He turned and ambled back to his cruiser, the weight of his impending actions pressing upon him. He faced a fugitive to locate, a blaze to scrutinize, and a deluge of questions craving answers. And somehow he sensed the solutions wouldn't be easily unearthed. Harmony's justice. The rising sun gilded Harmony Creek, stretching elongated shadows across the jewel-toned grass still wet with morning dew. Sheriff Brody, perched on his porch swing, found its measured cadence a poor match for the storm brewing within him. Willow's compassionate words, a plea for understanding, wrestled with the telex's cold pronouncements in his thoughts. He surveyed the town, his haven, the place he'd sworn an oath to safeguard, and the star on his chest felt like an unbearable weight. Inside the diner, the mingled scents of strong coffee and unspoken worries permeated the air. The whispers regarding Dusty Rivers were a constant hum. Yet an unexpected shift was occurring. Instead of condemnation, a staunch defense was taking root. "That man rescued Willow from the flames," Martha, the baker, declared, punctuating her statement with the resounding thud of a cinnamon roll tray hitting the counter. "He risked all he had. I don't give a fig what that machine spits out." A chorus of affirmations arose, each recounting a small kindness, Dusty's help with Mrs. Gable's groceries, his repair of the church's stubborn leak. A simmering indignation began to bubble. They believed they knew Dusty. Or perhaps they wanted to. Old Man Hemlock, the townskeeper of memories, offered a surprising perspective. "Remember the lumber mill inferno back in '88? Fingers were pointed, but the guilty party was never found. Dusty's arrival is too convenient. And right before Willow's misfortune, too." "That's true," added Sarah, the waitress, her voice a shaky blend of trepidation and resolution. He was so composed, so efficient. Like he had experience dealing with such things. That's the bearing of someone trained. Spurred by moral outrage and their fiercely held loyalties, the townsfolk resolved to intervene. They wouldn't permit Dusty Rivers to be condemned by conjecture and half-truths. They would unearth the reality. A small group descended upon the fire-ravaged remains of Willow's cottage, meticulously combing through the wreckage, seeking any overlooked clue. It was Sarah who made the discovery, a compact, metallic container nestled beneath a charred beam. The label was scorched and difficult to decipher, but it was clearly an accelerant not stocked at the local hardware store. "Hold on," Sarah exclaimed. Dusty mentioned the fire had a smell like kerosene mingled with something else. He said it rang a bell, but he couldn't place it. Sheriff Brody, who had observed their efforts with a burgeoning hope, experienced a sudden surge of realization. He recalled Dusty mentioning a faint, chemical tang, unlike kerosene, that stirred a buried memory. He had dismissed it as the product of a distraught mind. He gingerly picked up the canister, scrutinizing the faded inscription. With the aid of a magnifying glass, he discerned fragments of a brand name, Chemsolve. A swift call to the state police confirmed that Chemsolve was a specialized industrial solvent primarily used in metalworking and construction. A chilling premonition gripped Brody. Only one location in Harmony Creek used Chemsolve, the new construction zone at the town's edge, managed by a glib, fast-talking foreman named Jake Finley. Finley had arrived approximately a month prior to Dusty's appearance. Brody tracked down Finley at the construction site where he was bellowing instructions. A robust individual with evasive eyes and a telltale nervous tic. Brody confronted him with the canister, the fragmented label, and Dusty's description of the peculiar odor. Finley initially feigned ignorance, but under Brody's relentless questioning, his composure crumbled. He confessed to being hired to persuade Willow, owner of the land adjacent to the site. The developers had attempted to buy her out, but she refused. He panicked when the blaze spiraled out of control. With Finley detained, Sheriff Brody returned to the town square where a throng had congregated, eager for news. He raised a hand, silencing the concerned muttering. "We apprehended him," Brody announced, his voice filled with elation. Jake Finley confessed to starting the fire. "Dusty Rivers is innocent." A resounding cheer erupted, sweeping over the square like a cleansing wave. The townsfolk, resolute in their conviction, had fashioned their own form of justice. Brody found Dusty seated on the general store's porch, observing the commotion with a still intensity. He approached and extended a hand. "Dusty," he said, "I owe you both an apology and my gratitude. You rescued Willow and, in doing so, you rescued this town from its worst impulses." Dusty hesitated, then clasped Brody's hand, his grip firm. For the first time he elaborated, his voice a low rumble, yet clear. "My name is Daniel Rivers," he began. "I served as A.U.S. Marshal. I was falsely accused of stealing from an evidence locker. I fled because I was certain I wouldn't receive a fair trial. Running was a mistake, but I couldn't confront the deceit." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the joyous faces of the townsfolk. "Harmony Creek afforded me the possibility of a clean slate, a chance at tranquility. And you," he looked at Brody, and then towards the now plainly visible widow Willow, "you restored my faith in others." He stepped forward, addressing the entire gathering. "I came seeking anonymity, but discovered something far more precious, a community. I thank you for believing in me." A hush fell over the square, a silence brimming with understanding and compassion. Then Willow approached, her hand extended. Dusty took it, a soft smile gracing his lips. Harmony Creek had meted out its unique brand of justice, and in the process granted Dusty Rivers, Daniel Rivers, a reason to stay.